There is a literacy crisis in America, especially among children of color, African American, Hispanic American, and Native American. There are reasons why this crisis exists, but there are also resolutions. I am so pleased that you joined me on this webinar. I am Dr. Shelley McIntosh. My educational and professional experiences span 35 years, serving in capacities of a faith-based national youth director, elementary school teacher, professor of teacher education, elementary school principal, English language arts instructional coach, direct instruction trainer, and author. My expertise is curriculum and instruction, of which I hold a master and doctorate degree. This is where I'm from. Where I'm from. My DNA says I'm from the Congo, Ghana, Togo, Senegal, and Nigeria, from ancestors I can only imagine through my mind's depictions. I'm from the institution of slavery and freed grandparents. I'm from the Reverend Rufus James Miller and Rutha Lee Craig, parents of the Black migration from South to North in America. They traveled all the way with a baby girl, the twin that survived, and made the city of Detroit their new home, where they welcomed their third daughter, first to be born up north, Shelley Elaine. I'm from being educated in Detroit schools, ranked 10th in class. I'm from the swinging melodies of Motown, flowing, penetrating our east side neighborhood. Life was so good. I'm from civil rights, rebellions, and social justice Afro. Community was the theory and practice. Serve without pay. Mama, you mean I can't get minimum wage? I babysat all day. I'm from service and leadership, nationally directing youth programs, leading adults and children's groups, supervising student teachers, ministering, christening, and marriages. I'm from higher education, teaching undergrad and grad courses, serving on numerous committees and writing scholarly papers. I'm from being an urban school principal with an unrelenting passion that everything is done for the benefit of the child. I'm from education chose me. I always place myself in context because it expands self-knowledge and perspectives of the past and current realities. The literacy crisis. The National Assessment of Educational Programs, the acronym is NAEP, is a nationally representative assessment of what our nation's students know and can do. It is the nation's report card. Testing is done every 2 years for 4th and 8th grades and every 4 years for 12th grade. The highest possible score is 500. These are cut scores. A cut score is the score at which a student passes or fails. It separates passing students from failing students. If a 4th grade student scores 208, which is the NAEP basic level, the students should be able to locate relevant information, make simple inferences, and use their understanding of the text to identify details that support a given interpretation or conclusion. Students should be able to interpret the meaning of a word as it is used in the text. If a 4th grade student scores 238, which is the NAEP proficient level, that student should be able to integrate and interpret text and apply their understanding of the text to draw conclusions and make evaluations. If a 4th grade student scores 268, the NAEP, that's the advanced level. The student should be able to make complex inferences and construct and support their inferential understanding of the text, Students should be able to apply their understanding of a text to make and support a judgment. I know that's a lot. In layman's terms, the student should be able to not only read the words, but interpret, analyze, and evaluate the text of a story, an article, or a book. The NAEP scores for 2019 are disaggregated by race/ethnicity. The scores and percentage proficient are listed. For whites, the reading score is 230, 45% are proficient. For Black, 204, 18% are proficient. For Hispanic, 209, 23% are proficient. For Asian Pacific Islanders, 237, 55% proficient. For Asian, 239, 57% proficient. For Native Hawaiian, 212, 25% proficient. American Indian/Alaska Native, 204, 19% proficient. Two or more races, 226, 40% proficient. Nationally, American Indian, Alaska Native, and African Americans score below the basic level. I am a native Detroiter and Michigander, so reading data of my hometown and state are very important to me. According to the 2019 NAEP, the state of Michigan scores are white, 37% proficient, Black, 15% proficient, Hispanic, 18% proficient, Asian, 44%, two or more races, 35%. Locally, African American and Hispanic Americans score below the basic level. An important point is that the NAEP assumes that students should be able to decode words. It doesn't assess reading foundational skills, but it assumes students should be proficient in decoding words. Why and how does this literacy crisis exist? I have identified some major reasons for the literacy crisis: anti-literacy laws, failure to acknowledge standard English learners, failure of effective reading instruction using the whole language approach. Anti-literacy laws. As a principal, I ask myself, how did I learn to read? While over 80% of African American students and other students of color are not proficient in reading. This led me on a quest to research literacy history in America. For approximately 100 years, it was a crime to teach African Americans to read. These were anti-literacy laws, a natural extension of the slave code system, preventing the enslaved population from being taught how to read and write. The purpose of such laws was to reinforce the notion that Africans were inferior to whites. In the antebellum South, literacy was a sign of intellectual development and potentially social mobility. In fact, many white Southerners were illiterate, so it was imperative to prevent the blacks from learning to read in order to maintain the myth of white supremacy and the myth of black inferiority. However, another major concern was that if blacks were literate, they could forge documents of freedom, which they did. Between 1740 and 1834, the states of Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, Virginia, and Missouri all passed laws to prohibit teaching African Americans to read, which were punishable by jail time, lashings, and fines. In the North, there were no laws against teaching blacks to read or write, but there were laws preventing them from attending public school. Angry mobs destroyed private schools who admitted black students. The United States is the only country known to have had anti-literacy laws. Another reason is the failure to acknowledge standard English learners. I attended the Harvard National Institute for Urban School Leaders. Approximately 300 administrators from various states and countries were in attendance. This was the first time I heard Dr. Norma Lemoynes. She presented the NAEP statistics and asked why students of color score low and why is there a reading gap between them and white students. Several administrators responded with lack of motivation and lack of parental support. She listened for a few minutes and then stated that language played a major role in reading proficiency. Dr. Norma Lemoynes has researched language acquisition extensively of several racial groups. She identifies the linguistic rules, culturally and historically, that students bring to the classroom. For African Americans, she identifies the following. These are phonological features of African American language. She identifies consonant cluster as one of the ways that African Americans speak differently. In mainstream American English, these consonant clusters are pronounced as in the following words: desk, test, code. But in African American language, we will leave off a consonant. So instead of saying desk, we would say desk. Instead of test, test. And instead of code, coal. She mentioned the TH sound, that many of the African slaves that were brought to America came from the west coast of Africa, and there was no TH sound. So instead of saying this, they would say dis. Instead of saying thin, would say tin. And instead of saying mouth, would say mouth. She also mentioned about the R sound. In mainstream American English, it would be sister or Carol, but in African American language, it just may be sister or Kale. And the stress patterns are different. In mainstream American English, the stress is put on police or hotel, but in African American language, it would be the police or hotel. And the L sound. In mainstream American English, it would be always or million. In African American language, it would be always or million. Her research indicates that there was no TH sound in West Africa, as I stated. My DNA shows that this is where I'm from. Suddenly, I remembered that when I was very young, I would say this for this, them for them, and that for that. In fact, that brought tears to my eyes. She continued by saying that African slaves had no formal English class. They ingeniously integrated language rules from their native tongues to learn English. The pronunciation and meaning were passed from generation to generation. Dr. Lemoynes points out the grammatical features also. There is a linking variable. In mainstream American English, they would say he is going, whereas in an African American language, we just may say he going. And then there's the possessive marker, John's cousin. We just may say John cousin. The plural marker, I have 5 cents. In African American language, it will be I have 5 cents. We leave that S off. And verb agreement, he runs home. In African American language, we may say he run home. And then there's the habitual be. In mainstream American language, she is often at home. In African American language, she be at home. The cultural differences in pronunciation and grammar affect students' learning. For example, a teacher corrected the pronunciation of a second grader who said "affa" instead of "after." The student told the teacher she was wrong because her grandmother says "affa." Dr. Lemoynes stated that African American, American Indian, Hawaiian American, and Mexican Americans are standard English learners, which means standard English is not native to them. They speak English relevant to their culture, experiences, and history. These students from diverse cultures enter a traditional American school where their culture, language, experience, behaviors, and ways of learning often do not match school norms and teacher expectations. Thus, they constitute a large percentage of those students performing below and far below basic in core academic areas. If standard English learners are to succeed in American schools, they must be taught to translate their language to standard English. I have seen a fourth grader translate a sentence she wrote from her cultural language to standard English. She originally wrote, "We be going to the store." Her teacher kindly pointed out that the sentence reflected her proud culture and asked her to translate it. She then wrote, We are going to the store. Standard English learners must acquire mastery of Standard English and the literacies of school because schools serve as gatekeepers to educational and career opportunities. How best to facilitate the learning or this learning has proven elusive for most public educational institutions. Another reason for the literacy crisis is the failure of effective reading instruction. In the 1930s, a number of professors of education advocated the whole language or whole word method to teach reading. This was based on the flawed premise that children learn to read naturally, and some say as a part of a larger conspiracy to dumb down Americans so that they could be led to give up their individualistic freedoms and adopt a socialist form of government. In fact, during that time, Dr. Guy Bond stated, "It is detrimental indeed to have the children spell or sound out their words at this stage." Dr. Donald Durrell stated, "Current practice in the teaching of reading does not require knowledge of letters." And then Professor Walter Dearborn stated, "Little is gained by teaching the child his sounds and letters as a first step to reading. More rapid results are generally obtained by the direct method of simply showing the word to the child and telling him what it is." In 1955, Rudolph Flesch wrote Why Johnny Can't Read and What You Can Do About It. He explicitly stated that whole language instruction failed to teach students to read. He advocated for phonics instruction and was met with vehement opposition from education professors. The New Illiterates and How to Keep Your Child from Becoming One, published in 1973 and written by Samuel Blumenfeld, reinforces the position of Flesch, but also discovers that the look and say method was actually created for deaf students. In addition, he argues that children were diagnosed with several diseases if they could not read when taught by the whole language method. Finally, he exposes the collaboration between education professors and publishing companies for profit, both proponents of whole language, both responsible for the literacy crisis. Why Johnny Still Can't Read, a new look at the scandal of our schools, also written by Rudolph Flesch in 1980, discusses how the action of those in the educational and political arenas were in fact scandalous, favoring profit over effective phonics reading instruction. In the 1970s, the literacy gap began to widen between students of color and white students. It was during this time that the whole language approach proponents won. The state of California, one of the largest purchasers of textbooks, then followed by the state of Texas, the second largest purchaser of textbooks, adopted the whole language approach, which quickly spread through teacher education programs throughout America from the 1970s through the 1990s and until this day. Professors wrote college textbooks, publishers produced them, teacher education students learned the whole language approach to teach reading, they graduated and were certified, lacking the knowledge of how to successfully teach students to read. The whole language approach, the failure of professors of education and teachers to consider the cultural language and experiences students bring to the classroom, lack of knowledge about the history of reading instruction and the underlying philosophies, and profit over rationality all contribute to the literacy crisis. Children suffered. Many graduated from high school with low reading and writing skills. Nelson Mandela said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." Our children are our gifts. My firstborn is a girl named Latifah. She is much older now. As an infant, she had a baby bed with a rail that could be lowered to make it easy to change her diaper or raised to keep her in the bed and protect her from falling out of it. One sunny day when Latifah was about 7 months old and could crawl, I placed her in the baby bed to take a nap, gave her a bottle, and raised the rail. I left the bedroom, walked through a short hallway, the living room, then the dining room, and into the kitchen where I proceeded to wash and sterilize her bottles. Suddenly, I felt the presence of something behind me. When I turned around, I was startled. Latifah was on hands and knees with a big smile. I picked her up and asked, "How did you get out of bed?" As if she could answer me. I placed her back in the bed and said, "Show me how you got out." She grabbed the rail, put one leg over, then the other. I caught her to stop her from falling to the carpet. As a young mother, I didn't know that my baby was internally motivated to get out of that bed. I've learned that my baby was born, as all children, with 3 psychological needs. One is to be autonomous. She decided to get out of that bed on her own. 2, the need for relatedness. She wanted to be with me, not in a bedroom by herself. And 3, the need to be competent. She wanted to master her environment, to do it herself. She was born with something inside so strong that motivated her to act without any external rewards, but for the sheer joy and satisfaction of mastery. All human beings are born with these needs. This is the self-determination theory, which posits how we are internally motivated. When the environment nurtures all 3, then we flourish, thrive, expand, evolve, and have a healthy mental state. However, when they are not met, there's emptiness, frustration, low sense of self, and a mental state in turmoil. Children have a need to be competent, which means to have the ability, knowledge, or skill to succeed. School success depends on being competent in reading, whether it is the Common Core state standards or state-developed curriculum. It requires that students are competent in knowing how to read, to gain understanding by reading, and to analyze the writings of authors in all genres: poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and informational text. These curriculums also require that students are able to write essays, persuasive, informational, poetry, etc. But if students cannot read proficiently, they are unsuccessful in their academics. Legislators recognized the literacy dilemma and, instead of analyzing the root of the problem, addressed the symptoms through punitive actions against the child in the form of the 3rd grade reading law. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, in 2015, roughly 2 out of 3 4th graders failed to score proficiently in reading. Legislators believed that states would take literacy seriously if students were retained. Currently, at least 26 states have 3rd grade reading laws that allow students to be retained if they are not reading proficiently by the 3rd grade. Black students are retained more than any other group. Not reading proficiently and then being retained have negative effects on the emotional and psychological state of children. Retention impacts graduation rate. Children retained in kindergarten through 5th grade, 60% of them are less likely to graduate high school. Black and Hispanic are more likely to be retained. In school year 2009 through 2010, 56% of those retained in the 4th grade were African American, and 49% of the 3rd grade were African American. In all years between 2000 and 2016, a higher percentage of Black and Hispanic students than of white students were retained. Percentage of white and Hispanic students retained in 2016 were about the same. In 2019, disparities in retention continue. The need to be competent is oppressed. Children portray their anger by being defiant with teachers, or they draw attention to themselves by talking loud and joking. They may feel hopeless. Emotionally, they are in turmoil. They are only children, and if they are to be competent in reading and school success, then intentional adults must create a learning, nurturing environment. There are ways to resolve the literacy crisis. There are resolutions to the literacy crisis. 1, effective reading instruction. 2, brain research that points to phonics being most effective. And 3, the direct instruction model. Effective reading instruction. Neuroscientist Dr. DeHaan researched how the brain is impacted by learning to read. The results indicate that the brain creates an interface between sound, spoken language, and symbol, written language. And even as adults, the brain still processes individual letter sounds when we read. Dr. DeHone strongly advocates phonics instruction as the only way to teach reading. However, there must be an effective teaching model for students to be successful. The direct instruction model posits if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. This is the premise of Dr. Siegfried Engelmann, creator of the direct instruction model. Direct instruction, both the D and the I are capitalized to distinguish it from the direct instruction that is a derivative of Dr. Engelmann's work. Dr. Engelmann discovered through a process of trial and error in the classroom that the intellectual crippling of children is caused overwhelmingly by faulty instruction, not by faulty children. A study reviewed the cases of 5,000 students who were evaluated by school psychologists to determine why they were doing poorly in class. All 5,000 evaluations attributed the students' problems to deficiencies in the child and the child's family. Not one linked the students' problems to faulty curricula, poor teaching practices, or bad school management. Engelmann's theory is that a child's mind is entirely logical in the way it learns, and that what or how much it learns depends on how logically it is taught. The learning process is the same for all learners. Learning failures are due to technical problems the teacher can readily correct, such as ambiguous communication, the learner's lack of necessary background knowledge, or inadequate practice to master what is presented. The key to avoiding these is to control the teacher's input. What humans learn is perfectly consistent with the input they receive. Engelmann's direct instruction boils down to 5 big ideas. Rule number 1, be clear. Specify the precise sequence of examples, tasks, and wording to teach subjects clearly. Rule number 2, be efficient. Teach more in less time by being aware of the mind's instinct to generalize by teaching a series of steps to solve problems. Rule number 3, teach to mastery. Teach so thoroughly that students never forget them. Rule number 4, celebrate success. Instruction designed to encourage self-confidence in both teachers and students. And rule number 5, beware intuition. Replace intuition about what works and whether we are teaching well with a much more reliable guide, scientific evidence from the classroom. Direct instruction is a scientifically based program. I used the programs to teach children to read before kindergarten, provided reading intervention for in-school and after-school programs, and tutored students, bringing them to grade level. I coached teachers using strategies and language from the direct instruction in their schools' reading programs, and was successful in moving kindergarten students to read on a first grade level and lower performing fourth grade students to make the most growth out of all other reading groups in the classroom. When a child can read, he can academically achieve and gain access to global information. Reading is a civil right. In my course of Action to Literacy, I intentionally utilized the direct instruction model, its wording and strategies to help teachers succeed in reading instruction. Course of Action to Literacy helps to integrate these in your reading program. Each of the 7 modules begins with real-life scenarios of reading challenges in the classroom for you to reflect upon, outcomes, informational content, tools, and action steps. Module 1 and Module 2 provide the theoretical foundation for the direct instruction model. Modules 3 through 7 provide practice, your demonstration, and feedback from a coach. Course of Action to Literacy modules contain How do students learn to read? That's Module 1, where you gain knowledge of how children learn to speak and learn the brain research about reading. Module 2, What is direct instruction? In that module, you'll examine the components of the direct instruction model. Module 3, Practice the sounds. You will learn how 26 letters represent at least 40 sounds in the English language. It also provides opportunity for you to practice the sounds. Module 4, Teaching Phonemic Awareness. You will learn the definition of phonemic awareness and how to teach it. Module 5, teaching letter sound correspondence. You will examine letter sound correspondence, wording, and strategies to teach it. Module 6, teaching blending and word reading. You will learn about how reading is taught. Without blending, students will not be able to read words. And finally, Module 7, immediate feedback and corrections. You will learn how to give immediate feedback and correction for student reading success. Our children can be competent in reading because of intentional adults who provide a learning and nurturing environment. The literacy crisis has resolutions. I've provided a link for you to register for Course of Action to Literacy. Remembering all children can read, all children shall read.